So, topic for today is the fear of overcoming mistakes as a coach. I know for a lot of people who are getting started and people also who are in like the middle of that journey, that fear seems really big, especially when you step onto sessions. And the reality is you don't want to feel crippled on those sessions. You don't want to constantly be so self-absorbed that am I going to make a mistake? Am I going to say the wrong thing? That you prevent yourself from establishing a connection with your client. And so that's what I'm going to focus on today is giving you, inshallah, some helpful tools on how to overcome the fear of making mistakes. And then, some tips on, inshallah, if you do, right? If it happens and what a mistake looks like, how to, inshallah, recover from it. And that will give you some confidence, I hope, in what you're in the journey you're going to have. So if I say anything and you have questions, type it into the chat here, inshallah, and I will pull from there. I'll try to answer a few at the end. But let's focus first and foremost on what is the psychology behind the fear of making mistakes, right? At the end of the day, we need to define for ourselves what a mistake is. Because if you have this fear, I'm going to mess up, I'm going to mess up, what does it actually mean to mess up? By defining that, you're already going to, alhamdulillah, make it feel much more manageable because a lot of people don't have clarity on what it means to make a mistake on a coaching session. Is it you say the wrong thing? Is it that you're directing the client too much? Is it that you have a fear of taking over the session? Like what it actually is that fear for yourself. So that's first and foremost, I'd encourage you get clear on what your fear is around the mistake and what is that mistake. Ideally, what I would encourage you to do, inshallah, and what an opportunity for growth can be is practice some self-awareness by asking, what are some of my weaknesses that I want to be mindful of on the session? For example, do you tend to maybe talk a little too much and are so quick to respond maybe to a client that you don't give them space to speak? Are you, do you maybe get so excited to help that you start giving a lot more solutions before asking more questions? So, this kind of self-awareness can help you to be mindful because the fear of mistakes usually is connected to areas that we're weak in, and you have a fear of feeling like you won't be in control and you'll let these areas that you need to improve on take over. So that's what I would recommend is first practice some self-awareness that what are the things that you have a challenge with, and if you struggle to have awareness around that, it's really important to ask your friends. SubhanAllah, I have a close friend who really lacks sometimes awareness of how she might take over conversations and like no one else really gets to speak at all, or even when we're sharing, somehow it always directs back and becomes about her. And so I had to have a really uncomfortable conversation years, later finally and tell her like, hey, I feel like every time we get together, I don't get to speak, or I feel like you kind of take over the conversation. So if you're that person where you don't have awareness, I'd encourage you, ask people around you then, right? Hey, what are the qualities you appreciate about me when we're having conversations when we hang out? And what are the qualities you think I need to improve on? That will help you, inshallah, in becoming aware of where that fear needs to be, inshallah, managed and perhaps placed. Maybe it's completely in the wrong area. So that's first and foremost is be clear on what those mistakes could be, right? What it could look like for you and define that for yourself, inshallah. And by doing that, alhamdulillah, you're already going to feel empowered because well, this is my weak spot. So that's why my fear is warranted, right? It's warranted. That's what's really important. But sometimes you might have a fear because, yeah, I do tend to feel nervous and take over. I do feel nervous and I tend to blabber on when I don't need to, or I tend to constantly go to solutions, right? So whatever that may be, inshallah, it might be warranted fear. And this can, alhamdulillah, help you get some really powerful insights as well. And then let's talk about humility. I think that's really important. So, you've done the self-awareness, inshallah. You're like, hey, I know these are the areas I want to be really mindful of on the session, inshallah. And then thirdly is having the humility that you might make mistakes. And that's not because something's wrong with you, but because this is also a journey of growth for you, right? Having the humility to know I'm not a perfect coach as I'm starting off the journey. And there's no reason you should be, right? So I think a lot of people have this like perception of I am perfect or I should be perfect. And then that means I'm a really good coach. No, I think the journey of humility is really important as a coach. And that's something I talk a lot about in Adwam because I believe this is a really important quality for a coach to have throughout your career. The humility to be constantly learning, the humility to know I'm constantly growing, the humility to know my client is not less than me. And we're in this relationship together, inshallah, and of support and collaboration of helping them, on their growth. So that's something that's really important, inshallah, to remember that having the humility will, alhamdulillah, help you again overcome some of those blocks and fear of making mistakes. Have the humility too. I probably will make mistakes, right? I probably will have some slip ups. And that's okay, inshallah. I'm just going to be committed to continuous growth. So that reframing is really powerful and very important to have. Now I want to go into like the big part, right? So far we've said first define the fear for yourself around what you think the mistake might be. What does the mistake actually look like for you? And then having a reframing mindset is really important. And then small steps, small steps as you approach your coaching journey. I think if you were to, so one of the things that you do at Adwan, for example, to get your certification is you do 30-minute coaching calls. And the reason that we have it at 30 minutes is, alhamdulillah, it's a lot smaller of a step to start on versus like do 60 minutes right away. And so just by getting on a 30-minute coaching call, alhamdulillah, it feels a lot more manageable. It builds your confidence, which is really important, inshallah, empowers you to see yourself as a coach and be able to start this journey and do those coaching sessions. So small steps is really important. And even inshallah, as you develop, those small steps will obviously start to look different and evolve. So keep asking yourself that this is something that you really struggle with. And then the feedback mechanism is really important, right? It's important to discuss and seek feedback from clients in a way that doesn't look like, like you need to be tasteful about it. And so one of the things I think is at the end of the session, right? How are you feeling? What are some of the takeaways? What did you really appreciate about the session? These are really powerful questions to help organically bring about feedback that will help you. And then if you wanted to, you could also send like an anonymous type feedback form after the session to your clients. And especially when you're practicing to help you learn where you need to grow and what needs to be happening there. So that can be a way, inshallah, for you to have insight. And insight is so important when it comes to overcoming fear. Because again, fear grows when we don't have data. Fear grows when we don't define terms. And so, alhamdulillah, by you having this piece of data, it's going to help you be really specific, inshallah, and connected to where that opportunity is for yourself and what the client did see or what they didn't see. Because you might have felt on a session, for example, like, oh my God, I totally, feel like I botched that session. I wasn't guiding them. I wasn't reframing, but the client might be like, that was really helpful. I did gain insight. I was given a space to ask questions. And so their experience might be very different. And so sometimes, we are much harder on ourselves than others. And this might help, inshallah, give you some self-compassion. And then that's kind of like the last step that I think is a powerful strategy for yourself. It's self-compassion, right? You're starting this journey to expect yourself or compare yourself to people who have been doing this much longer for a decade and, are obviously on that path. It's not very compassionate to compare yourself and think that you should just already have these coaching skills or be aware of like all the tools and be practicing those on sessions. So practice of self-compassion of where you're at, what your starting point is, and that can help in overcoming mistakes. And so self-compassion, practically speaking, what that can look like is on a session, maybe you're stuck, right? You don't know what to ask a client in that moment. And you could just say, I'm just really thinking about that point that you said, because I'm just thinking like, what question, would be really powerful for you to ask. And so it can show that I don't have all the answers, and that's okay. And that can be compassionate. So giving yourself space to sometimes be honest and vulnerable. And I talked about this in previous coaching corners that, that's a healthy part of coaching. And your client will appreciate that you don't have this like, okay, I know it all, but rather this like, yeah, let's explore that. We're going in there together. And again, this is something I talk about in Adwam, our coaching certification program. One of the elements I talk about is this really important idea of, what does it look like to have humility and use that as actually like, alhamdulillah, a strength in your coaching programs, and this humility of, I don't know, like, how do you tastefully do that? I think that's really important, Shah. All right, the last couple of things I want to just address here is how do you build confidence and resilience? So you have this fear, I'm going to make mistakes. How do you build, confidence, inshallah, and resilience when it comes to, overcoming this fear of making mistakes? So I think a really important part is having role models I think having people that are successful coaches and leaders, alhamdulillah, connecting with them, hearing from them can give you valuable insights. And that's something that, inshallah, and Adwan, we have a group coaching calls weekly where I bring on coaching experts, myself, some of our other instructors, people who've been doing this, mashallah, for a decade. And, you get to learn some really valuable behind the scenes and get to ask questions. And that can really help because then you get to see, oh, this is normal to feel this way. Or, that slip up I had, I thought it was so bad, but I guess it's kind of normal on that journey or in that conversation. So that's something that's going to help you overcome, inshallah, in the sphere of making mistakes. And then community learning is really important, community learning. And so what happens in Adwan is, we have like we're so mindful that this is the coaching journey, right? That you are going to feel fear and you're going to get stuck in places. So we have built in, alhamdulillah, components to help you with that. So a really big part, if you feel like you have a lot of fear in making mistakes, is expose yourself to community learning. Be in groups and inshallah environments, discussing errors where you're getting the safety of sharing your experience. And so again, we have, our group coaching calls weekly, but then we also have like peer-to-peer, and we have our private Facebook group where people engage and share, what questions they might have with a client, something that came up. And so that makes it easier to know, okay, I'm not alone. There's other people that also are, maybe having a similar experience or have worked with clients, and that can, alhamdulillah, help you feel a little more confident and inshallah empowered to, it's okay to make mistakes, but learn from them and we move on, right? And then I think really important is, having that Islamic perspective of intention. Like if your intention is genuinely to get on that session and support your client, and you're going to focus on, alhamdulillah, that, then, it doesn't really matter if there is a mistake made, because inshallah, you're going to be able to learn from it, or you can always say, oh, I'm sorry, I feel like you get an opportunity to share, and you're able to like bring it up in that session. So I think having that sincere niyyah intention is so important, alhamdulillah, and it's going to move that focus away from you, but inshallah on your client, that, I'm here and I want to support them to have the best outcome. And, just yesterday, subhanAllah, I had a session with a client, subhanAllah, where she's in a situation in her life where she really doesn't know like what direction she wants to go into, and some big decisions she has to make for her and her family. And I came on the session, and, to be honest, from what she had shared previously, like before us starting, I really didn't know how I would support her in terms of, I know I'm not, I can't, I'm not going to tell her what to do. My goal is going to be to help her get clarity and inshallah help her overcome fear, maybe in certain parts. And so I had this really, compassion towards myself, that like, look, I'm going to go in and I'm going to let her share. I'm going to ask some more questions, and then inshallah we'll figure out that plan together. And she felt that, and gave her space where, instead of coming in feeling like, okay, I've got to know exactly what I'm going to do, alhamdulillah, she felt like that release, and she felt the safety to engage in that. So I think sometimes that fear of making mistakes is really bottled up in like, oh, I should already have a plan. And if you already come into a session with like, oh, this is what should be happening, and you're trying to fit the client into it, they'll feel it. And I've been on the receiving end of coaches who've done that, where I've been getting coached and they just like have this like rigid, want to make sure my connection's gonna go. Yeah. And so where they have just tried to like put me into their coaching session and what framework and the points they want to discuss. And I remember feeling so unheard and was like, I do not want to work with this person. That, like, that you don't want to have that. So it's actually to your detriment. And then I think in terms of like coping mechanisms, if you ever like mess up super bad, and I don't even know, in my coaching experience, I actually, like, I think the only big mistake I can think of is someone, coach sharing with me how they didn't realize at the time, but they shamed the client for like a mistake they made and or sin they were committing, and pretty much instead of coaching them, started giving them unfortunately scolding, almost, you could say, but like it wasn't, in that way. They thought they were coaching. And so that's kind of like the biggest mistake, alhamdulillah, that person realized. And it was actually because of community engagement, where they shared with another coach that this is how they approach it. And the other coach was like, no, that really does not sound ideal. And so that person was able to, alhamdulillah, get some really valuable feedback. But even in that, like, we know that inshallah, even if you make a mistake, you turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? You ask for tawbah, you ask for growth, you ask for, and inshallah, if it's done with a sincere intention of wanting to support a client, like it's not like you intentionally try to hurt someone, right? So like I find it really hard for you to make any kind of mistake that would be so extreme. And so alhamdulillah, we have that outlet and always turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to empower us, to inspire us, and allow us to be capable of blessing, being a blessing in people's lives as we work, inshallah, and as we try to support them. And then I think it's really important to have like interactive live elements in your coaching journey. I think there's a lot of programs out there where people go through it and just like recordings, and there's no live element. And so that's something that's really important at Adwam. And that's why like we added the weekly group coaching calls. And then mashallah, there's people who are joining who took like our previous certification just for this part because it's so valuable. Having a community and an opportunity where you truly grow and can, inshallah, share and ask questions and get coached on the journey for yourself is like, it's so essential. So, I hope this session's been valuable. I think there's a lot to unpack when you have this fear of overcoming mistakes. And if you don't do this, if you don't, really strive to overcome those mistakes, you're going to struggle and you don't want it to affect your potential, inshallah. And most importantly, you're going to struggle because it's going to just be about you versus the client. And you don't want to be in that place. You don't want it to be so focused on, oh, I got to be the best coach showing up that the client's not even the focus anymore. So that's what this can really help with. And like I said, we go a lot into deeper in these kind of elements into Adwan. So if you're interested, inshallah, go have a look, go join. I know so many of you here, alhamdulillah, are already part of it, or you've been learning. And I think that'll be valuable. And honestly, Nadia sharing, I need to learn to talk less and listen more. Absolutely. That's such an important part, inshallah, of avoiding and overcoming your fear of making mistakes is just pause, right? Let the client speak, ask questions, genuinely being curious. Like that can be really powerful.